Last week we talked about the things that we want to do in 2023 to try to keep ourselves growing in our faith and keep ourselves connected to Jesus, His Word, and His people. We talked about using the quote from Jesus in Mark chapter 12 to help us remember the things that we want to be doing. He was asked what the greatest commandment was, and Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." And that's what we are going to use to help us remember the things we want to try and focus on in this coming year. The heart part of it represents our participation in worship as a part of the body here at West Salem. Soul represents our involvement in a small group or a Bible study of some kind, connecting with and building relationships with each other and encouraging and helping each other. Mind represents our personal Bible reading and prayer time to grow deeper in our understanding and relationship with Jesus. And strength represents our service in the church and in our community, using our time and talents and resources to support the mission and the ministry of the gospel. And loving our neighbors represents proclaiming the gospel, sharing our faith with the world around us through our attitudes, our actions, our service, and our words. And today, as we continue through our message series on the parables of Jesus, we find that statement about the greatest commandment again. This time, we're going to find it in Luke chapter 10. So let's start by reading Luke 10, 25 through 29. It says, "On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. 'Teacher,' he asked, 'what must I do to inherit eternal life?' 'What is written in the law?' he replied. 'How do you read it?' He answered, 'Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself.' 'You have answered correctly,' Jesus replied. 'Do this and you will live.' But he wanted to justify himself, and so he asked Jesus, 'And who is my neighbor?' Now, the parable that we're looking at today is told as an answer to this man's question, but I want to start with these verses because I think we have something to learn from this man. And it's very easy for us to have the same kind of attitude that he had. We see in this passage that this expert in the law had answered correctly. Jesus basically says, "Good job. You've read the law well. Do what it says." But he can't take that for an answer. He wants to split hairs. And it says that he asks, "Who is my neighbor?" because he wanted to justify himself. He's probably thinking, I can't be expected to love everyone like I love myself. So he basically says, how far does this loving my neighbor thing really go? And what we have to remember is our love for others should grow out of the love Jesus has shown us. We often have the same question this man did. How far does this love have to go? And we do it in all sorts of ways. We might read the words of Jesus where he says, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." And we might think, sure, that sounds good, but Jesus couldn't really expect me to love that person after what they did to me. Or we might read where Peter asks if he should forgive someone who sins against him up to 7 times. And Jesus answers, not 7 times, but 77 times. And we still sometimes will refuse to forgive people over simple things. We all know that the command that Jesus gave to his followers is to take the good news of the gospel to the world, to go and to make disciples, baptizing them and teaching them to obey everything that Jesus has commanded. And yet we're reluctant. And we let all sorts of things keep us from doing the very thing that Jesus said to do. We read and hear the words of Jesus, but we don't always do what he said. James 1:22 says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says." So we need to try to keep from having the same attitude as this expert in the law. Instead of putting the things he knew into practice, he was trying to find out the limit of what he could do. But we see in the story that Jesus tells as an answer to the question that Jesus is not asking us to do the minimum. He's asking us to love above and beyond what this world would expect. He's asking us to see people differently, treat people differently, and love people differently than the rest of the world does. So let's see what Jesus says in response to this man's question, who is my neighbor? In Luke 10, 30 through 35. It says, in reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have.'" As we look at this story, we have to remember that Jesus' original audience would have known exactly what road Jesus was talking about. He said that the man in the story was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and that would have meant that he was on a road known as the Jericho Road. This road at the time was very heavily traveled, but it was also a treacherous, winding road that descended down through the mountains. Everybody that was listening to Jesus would have known that this scenario was something that happened all the time. There are ancient accounts over hundreds of years that talk about this road and describe how bandits would rob people all along the Jericho Road. And these people would have known that someone traveling alone on the Jericho Road was in danger. When I was getting married down in Southern California, 2 of my friends drove down from Oregon for the wedding, and they had never been to California before, and so I made sure to give them good directions. The one thing I told them was to get off the freeway and get gas and food at the Grapevine exit before going up over the hill, over the mountains into LA. That way they wouldn't have to get off the freeway again until they got to where we lived. I told them this several times. And I told them to call me when they got close so I could make sure that they knew where they were going and they didn't get lost. And on the morning of the day that they were supposed to get there, one of them called. And right away I knew something was wrong. He was like, "We got off the freeway and we don't know how to get back on." And he was all panicked. So I asked them where they were, and when he told me the name of the street, I knew they were somewhere that they shouldn't be. They'd gotten off the freeway in a really bad part of Los Angeles. They were stopped at a stoplight while I was talking with my friend on the phone. And then he said, wait, some guy's coming up to the car. And then I hear him say, hey, what are you doing? You can't do that. And then he tells me some guy just walked up and reached through the window and took the food off of the dash that we had just gotten in the drive-thru. So I told him, just roll up your windows, get headed north, and keep going until you see a freeway entrance. But I couldn't believe that they had done exactly what I had tried to help them avoid. 2 young guys looking lost in a car with out-of-state plates in the neighborhood they were in was not a good situation. And some of the people listening to Jesus' story might have felt the same way. What was this guy doing traveling alone on the Jericho Road in the first place, they might think. He's just asking for trouble. And we can look at people in need around us and kind of think the same thing. But we can't reject people just because they've made bad choices. Jesus doesn't say for sure in this parable that might have been part of what the priest and the Levite were thinking as they passed by this man. They might have thought, well, he should have known better than to take this risk. And we have people all around us who have taken risks, who have made bad choices, and who are now suffering the consequences of those choices. And it can be easy for us to write them off and think, well, they got themselves into this, they can get themselves out. But in light of the way that God has treated us, we have to look at people differently. God saw us lost in our sin, without hope of ever being able to make up for our mistakes. He saw us in the dark, stumbling in our own strength. He saw us in a world of trouble of our own making, and he did not turn his back on us. He did not leave us to fend for ourselves. He chose to send his Son to be the way for us, the way to forgiveness, the way to truth, the way to salvation and new life. When he saw us in our weakness, he chose to lower himself to be one of us. He gave his life as a sacrifice to buy us back, to redeem us, to make us part of his kingdom. So we cannot just reject people and ignore them and write them off because they've made bad choices. We have to work for their healing and wholeness. We have to love them in a way that can help them to see that there is hope for a new life for them through Jesus too. And it's not hard at all for us to find excuses to write people off. There are 1,000 reasons that we can find to not get down in the dirt with people who are lost. But there's one reason for us to love people that overshadows all the excuses that we can find. In Luke chapter 6, Jesus is having dinner at the house of a Pharisee. And while they're at the table, this sinful woman comes and anoints Jesus with expensive perfume. She cries and she wets his feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. The Pharisee was appalled that Jesus would allow a woman like this in his presence. But in Luke 7:47, Jesus says, "For this reason I say to you, her sins, which are many, have been forgiven, for she loved much. But the one who is forgiven little loves little." If we have accepted the forgiveness that Jesus offers us, all of us have been forgiven so much. We should love in a way that reflects how much we have received in Jesus. But when we look at who we probably see as the villains in this story, the priest and the Levite who passed the man on the road, there might be a little more to them than we see at first glance. And what we see when we look at these two men is sometimes even good things can get in the way of us loving people. These were men with positions. They had people who had responsibilities. The priests would have probably been traveling as part of his priestly duties. Priests, even more than other Jews, held themselves to an extremely high standard of cleanliness. And the book of Numbers tells us that, according to the law, anyone who touches a dead body is ceremonially unclean for 7 days. If this priest had even gone over to touch this man to see if he was alive, he would have been at risk of being unclean and unable to perform his priestly duties for 7 days. He had people depending on him. He had important jobs to do. If he was unable to do his job for a week, hundreds of other people could have been impacted. And the Levite would have been in a similar situation. Levites worked in and around the temple. They did things like singing psalms, working on construction or craftsmanship projects, or serving as temple guards. He too would have had responsibilities. He would have had people depending on him. He would have been at risk. Risking a lot if he approached this man. And this priest and this Levite were probably also experienced travelers on this road, and they would have known that, the suspicious areas and the things to watch out for. And the bandits that robbed people along this road were well known for their creative ways of waylaying travelers. The priest and the Levite would have known that this man laying there on the side of the road, seemingly half dead or possibly dead, could have easily been a decoy, just pretending to be injured. And as soon as they stopped to approach him, his partners laying in wait could have jumped out and attacked them. There were a lot of variables in this situation, and weighing the risks, these two men decided that it was not worth their time to try to help this man. And when we see people in need, people beaten and bloodied by life, when we consider helping someone, we almost automatically think of what it would cost us. And the truth is, we are surrounded by people in need. Some of them are in obvious physical need, and some of them look like they have it all together, but when we really get to know them, we can see that they need spiritual help just as much as anyone else. And seeing people's real needs means investing our lives into them. All of us have busy schedules, and we don't know if we have time to give to someone in need. We might be afraid that if we give time or money or resources to someone, that they'll just come back and ask for more. We might be afraid that someone might be lying about their real situation. And we never want anybody to take advantage of us. Several years ago, I was getting off the highway here in Salem at the Lancaster exit. And there's almost always people gathered there at the intersection with signs asking people for money. And as I passed by, there was a man sitting in a lawn chair with a sign describing his situation and why he needed money. And I went around, I parked in a nearby parking lot because I was meeting somebody there, but I was early. So as I waited, I saw the same man walk by with his lawn chair and his sign just tucked up under his arm. And he walked way across that parking lot and across several other stores' parking lots way over to the other side. And then I watched as he opened the trunk of this nicely restored 60s convertible Mustang. And he tossed his chair and his sign in the trunk, jumped into this really nice car, put on some expensive looking sunglasses, and drove off. How do you think I felt? I was mad. I felt like I should chase him down and tell him that I knew what he was doing. I couldn't let him get away with this. I hadn't even given him any money or anything, and I still felt offended. And I should have been. It was dishonest. He was taking advantage of people's generosity. But what I can't allow that to do is to harden my heart. I can't let those kinds of things make me assume that every person who seems like they're in need is not worth my time or is dishonest in trying to take advantage of me. Because when we look at this parable, Jesus doesn't really make it about the man in need. Jesus makes it about how we treat people. The original question that the expert of the law asked is, who is my neighbor? His question was based on who other people were. He wanted to know what types of people he was expected to be a neighbor to. But at the end of this story, Jesus flips that whole situation on its head. Let's read Luke 10:36 through 37 and see what happens after Jesus finishes this parable. Jesus asked, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Did you see what Jesus did there? The idea of being a neighbor didn't have anything to do with the man who was laying on the side of the road. In our justice system, we have something called the burden of proof. In something like a murder case or an assault case, the burden of proof lies with the prosecution. A person who is accused of a crime doesn't have to prove that they didn't do it. It's up to the state or the authority to prove that the person is guilty. So if we look at what Jesus did with this story, he took the burden of proof off the man in need and put it on the man asking the question. This man who had been beaten and left for dead didn't have to prove that he was worthy of compassion and care. That responsibility lies with the people who had the opportunity to help him. So Jesus says, go and do what the Samaritan man did. Show mercy to people in need. To the Jewish people hearing Jesus tell this story, the idea of doing anything like a Samaritan would have been shocking. They looked at the Samaritans as basically useless wastes of space. But Jesus uses him as an example of how he expects his followers to act. And we see that the Samaritan man put the traveler's needs above his own. He, just like the priest and the Levite, this man would have had places to go, responsibilities to handle, but he made someone else's need a priority. He gave of his resources. He used bandages that he had with him. He used his own oil and wine to treat the man's wounds. He put the man on his own donkey and he walked because this injured man was not able to. Then he took the man to an inn where he could get more of the help that he needed. And I think that the Samaritan shows us here that loving people in need takes all of us. The Samaritan cared for the man who had been beaten overnight, and then he provided for the man's ongoing care. And he said he would come back again, but he enlists the innkeeper in helping this man. He continues with his other responsibilities once he knows that this man is stable. He didn't take the man home with him. He didn't completely give up his responsibilities. He showed mercy to the man. He took him to a safe place and provided for the help that he still needed. And oftentimes when we know that people are in need, we can feel like the problem is too big for us to help. But sometimes the way that we can help is by getting people connected with other people who can help more effectively. There are ways that I'm going to be able to help people that other people can't. And there are ways that you are going to be able to help people that I never could. So it's going to take all of us being willing to see people like Jesus sees them, being willing to show compassion and mercy to hurting people, being willing to give of ourselves, being willing to take the burden of being a loving neighbor on ourselves, and being willing to demonstrate how deeply we have been loved by Jesus, by loving others the way that he has loved us. Let's pray. Father, thank you that we have such a great example of love, selfless, compassionate, merciful love in Jesus that we can use to guide us as we try to love and care for and help other people. Thank you for all that we have received because of the love of Jesus, and help us to be generous, willing givers to other people as they are in need. And we pray that all of that would be for your glory. All of that would be with the purpose of drawing people closer to Jesus. That as we love them, they would come to understand that that love flows through us from Jesus, and that they would come to know him and to depend on him and to accept him as Lord and Savior. We love you and we trust you and we thank you for calling us to such a high position to be people who love other people the way that Jesus did. Help us to live up to that. Help us to have the courage to do what it takes to love people the way you want us to. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.